The stone walls of Constantinople rise like jagged shadows against the blood-red sky, a city built on dreams and betrayals, on centuries of glory now fading into dust. The scent of salt and smoke lingers in the cool evening air, mingling with the distant tolling of church bells and the hurried footsteps of guards patrolling the marble-paved streets. It is the year 1453. The last great city of the Roman world stands besieged, its ancient walls groaning under the weight of cannon fire and the merciless assault of the Ottoman army. Within the labyrinthine corridors of the great palace, hidden behind heavy velvet drapes and flickering oil lamps, moves a woman whose very existence is a secret, whispered only to a trusted few. She is the Empress Zoe Palaiologina, a figure cloaked in mystery and burdened by the impossible task of saving an empire crumbling under the shadow of a relentless enemy. At barely 25 years old, her hands tremble not from fear but from the fierce weight of destiny. In the tapestry-lit chambers where once emperors ruled with absolute power, Zoe's whispered plans echo against cold stone. She knows the city's fate hangs by a thread, woven by treachery, hope, and a desperate gamble on alliances forged in the shadows. Tonight, as the moon casts a silver gleam on the Bosphorus, Zoe prepares to make a choice that will echo through history, a choice that could save Constantinople or doom it forever. The blood-red sun sank behind the crumbling walls of Constantinople, casting long shadows over a city that once ruled the known world but now clung to life by a thread. Salt and smoke mingled in the evening air, carried by a cold breeze drifting in from the Bosphorus, a river of shadows that had witnessed the rise and fall of empires. Marble streets, slick with recent rain, reflected the flickering flames of torches held by weary sentinels, pacing atop battlements scarred by cannon fire. The year was 1453. The great city, once called New Rome, now bore the scars of centuries. Magnificent basilicas ravaged, imperial palaces hollowed out, and a population reduced to fearful whispers and desperate prayers. Outside its walls, the Ottoman army tightened their siege like a noose, battering the gates with thunderous bombardments that shook the foundations of the ancient city. Inside the great palace, hidden beneath heavy tapestries embroidered with imperial eagles, moved a woman whose every breath was weighted by the fate of Byzantium. Empress Zoe Palaiologina, scarcely more than a child by the reckoning of the great centuries, stood poised between history and oblivion. Her dark hair was pulled tight from her pale face, eyes sharp and haunted in the flickering candlelight. The air was thick with incense, mingled with the faint, metallic scent of blood from distant skirmishes. The chambers echoed with the soft rustling of silk and the quiet footsteps of trusted aides who dared not speak aloud. Outside, the toll of church bells marked the relentless passage of time, time slipping away faster than the city's defenders could hold their ground. Zoe's slender hands gripped the edge of an ornate wooden table carved with the empire's ancient symbols. Spread before her were maps, fragile parchment stained with the ink of endless wars and shifting borders. Fingers tracing the jagged lines of the city's walls, she memorized every gate, every tower where the defenders still clung to hope. Her mind raced, a tempest of strategy, alliances, and secrets. To the outside world, she was an empress in name only, a pawn in a game played by men twice her age and hardened by centuries of power struggles. But beneath her quiet exterior burned a fire fueled by desperation and fierce resolve. Just a few years ago, she had been a princess of Trebizond, a remote outpost of Byzantine legacy nestled along the Black Sea. Raised among the echoes of faded glory, Zoe was trained in courtly diplomacy, schooled in the arts of statecraft and survival. Yet nothing in her sheltered upbringing could have prepared her for the storm that awaited her in Constantinople, a city besieged not just by foreign steel but by the whispers of betrayal within its own walls. Tonight, a secret council would convene in the shadowed halls beneath the palace. Trusted generals, weary from endless battle, gathered alongside envoys from distant courts, emissaries carrying the fragile hopes of an empire gasping for life. Their voices, low and tense, spoke of alliances forged in desperation, of envoys sent to foreign kings, and of a final gamble that might turn the tide. Zoe listened in silence, her gaze fixed on a single candle flame dancing against the cold stone. She understood that words alone would not save Constantinople. Blood would be spilled, promises broken, and she, a woman bound by duty and boundless courage, would be forced to choose between survival and sacrifice. Outside, the city groaned under the weight of cannon fire. The thunder of Ottoman artillery rolled like an angry sea, shaking windows and rattling bones. The walls, once symbols of invincibility, showed cracks that deepened with every passing hour. In the quiet moments between the bombardments, Zoe's thoughts drifted to her family, a dynasty on the edge of extinction. The last emperor lay gravely ill, his strength fading like the dying light outside. The old guard whispered of surrender, but Zoe refused to let the empire fade without a fight. She thought of the thousands within the city, soldiers, clergy, and civilians, bound by hope and fear, their lives hanging in the balance. She thought of the ancient churches filled with the prayers of those who believed salvation still lingered within these stone walls. But she also knew the truth. Byzantium was no longer the unshakable fortress it once was. Its allies were few, its enemies many, and time was the cruelest enemy of all. As the last embers of the day faded, Zoe rose from her chair. She draped herself in a cloak embroidered with the double-headed eagle, the symbol of empire and faith intertwined. Her voice, steady but resolute, cut through the gathering shadows. "We will fight, not for a throne, not for glory, but for the memory of what this city once was. For our people, for the future, and if fate demands it, we will sacrifice everything." Outside, the wind carried the distant cries of battle, a symphony of despair and defiance beneath the moon's cold gaze. In that moment, the lost Empress became the last hope of an empire on the brink of darkness. In the cold cradle of Trebizond, far from the grandeur of Constantinople's golden domes, Zoe Palaiologina was born into a world already trembling on the edge of ruin. The year was 1439, and the once mighty Byzantine Empire had long since shrunk to scattered fragments clinging to survival. Trebizond was a fading jewel perched on the Black Sea's rugged coast, a city where the salty sea breeze mingled with the scent of wood smoke and the cries of gulls over the ancient harbor. From the moment she took her first breath, Zoe's life was bound to a fate far beyond childhood games or simple dreams. She was a princess of the Palaiologos dynasty, heirs to the Roman Empire, but heirs to a shadow of its former glory. Her father, Emperor Alexios IV of Trebizond, ruled a kingdom caught between the encroaching Ottoman menace and the ambitions of neighboring powers. The palace where Zoe grew up was a world of contrasts, glittering mosaics and faded frescoes, sumptuous feasts and whispered betrayals, tutors who taught the classics, and spies who reported every whispered conversation to watchful eyes. It was here that Zoe learned the art of diplomacy, not from books but from watching her family navigate treacherous waters where a single misstep meant death or exile. Her childhood was a fragile thread woven through the storm of politics. The distant thunder of Ottoman cannons echoed like a warning song, reminding all that no wall was impregnable, no alliance forever secure. Trebizond's survival depended on shifting allegiances, marriages forged to bind foreign powers, and envoys sent to courts far and wide begging for aid that never came in time. Zoe's mother, Theodora Cantacuzene, was a woman of fierce intellect and quiet strength. She ruled behind the scenes with the skill of a chess master, balancing delicate alliances and soothing rival factions within the court. From her, Zoe inherited more than royal blood. She inherited resilience and the knowledge that power often hid behind a veil of subtlety and sacrifice. As the years passed, Zoe was groomed for a destiny few women dared to dream of. She learned languages, Greek, Latin, Turkish, and studied theology and history, weaving herself into the fabric of an empire whose threads were unraveling. Yet beneath the polished surface of court life lay shadows darker than the long winter nights. The Ottomans, under the rising Sultan Mehmed II, were no longer a distant threat, but a storm gathering at the gates. The conquest of Constantinople loomed, a prize the Sultan craved not only for its wealth, but for the power and symbolism of ending the Byzantine saga. The Palaiologos court in Constantinople scrambled to prepare defenses, but betrayal lurked within as poison seeped through its veins. Amid this maelstrom, Zoe was summoned to Constantinople itself, promised in marriage to the young Emperor Constantine XI, a union designed to unite the frayed strands of a dying empire and strengthen the city's resolve. At barely 14, Zoe left the familiar coasts of Trebizond, crossing a landscape scarred by decades of war, her heart heavy with uncertainty. The journey to Constantinople was a somber procession, courtiers dressed in black, banners lowered in mourning for a city whose fate was whispered as already sealed. Zoe's thoughts turned to the palace's marble halls, where power had once flowed like a mighty river, but now trickled into desperation and fear. Constantine XI, known as the last emperor, was a man carved from iron and shadow. His shoulders bore the crushing weight of a crumbling realm, his eyes haunted by visions of an empire lost before his time. The young Empress was thrust into a court rife with suspicion, where allies hid daggers behind smiles and old rivalries burned beneath gilded masks. As she settled into her new role, Zoe found herself a piece in a grand game of survival. The city's defenders prepared for the inevitable assault, while emissaries pleaded with Western powers for aid that arrived too late or in inadequate numbers. Each day the walls were battered. Each night, prayers and curses echoed from the battlements. But even as the enemy amassed outside the gates, the greater danger came from within. Court intrigues wove a deadly web. Powerful nobles eyed the throne with greed, some whispering to the Ottomans, others plotting coups under the guise of loyalty. Trust was a scarce commodity, betrayal a currency paid in blood. Zoe's role transcended that of mere consort. She became a symbol, the living thread tying together a fractured people desperate for hope. Her youth belied a steely will. Her quiet presence carried the weight of generations of emperors and empresses before her. Her whispered counsels shaped decisions in war chambers. Her petitions to foreign courts carried the fragile hopes of survival. Yet, for all her efforts, the siege tightened like a noose. The city's heart beat unevenly, defiant yet fragile, vibrant yet exhausted. In the days leading to the final assault, Zoe walked the ramparts beneath a sky heavy with thunder. The walls bore the scars of cannon fire, their stones soaked with sweat and tears of the defenders. The horizon blazed with the fires of campfires and the banners of an unstoppable army. She paused, feeling the cold wind biting through her cloak, and looked out over the city she had vowed to save. The scent of jasmine from the palace gardens mingled with the acrid smoke of battle. Somewhere beneath the walls, the cries of children mingled with the clash of steel and the prayers of monks. In that moment, Zoe understood the cruel paradox of her fate. To save an empire meant surrendering her youth, her safety, and perhaps her very life. But surrender was not in her nature. As the first cannonball screamed through the night sky, striking the outer walls with a thunderous crash, Zoe steeled herself for what was to come, a desperate struggle against time, betrayal, and the unyielding march of history. The pounding of the great Ottoman cannons became the relentless heartbeat of Constantinople, shaking stone and spirit alike. Day by day, the ancient walls cracked beneath thunderous bombardment, dust swirling like ghosts over the blood-stained streets. The city, once a beacon of Christian civilization, was now a fortress gasping for breath. Its defenders outnumbered, outgunned, and desperate. In the shadowed chambers of the great palace, Empress Zoe Palaiologina moved like a wraith among the flickering candlelight and whispered conversations. Her eyes, dark and sharp as obsidian, flicked from face to face. Generals bent over maps, emissaries cloaked in the colors of distant courts, and courtiers whose smiles masked unreadable intentions. Each day brought fresh torment, news of allies who had failed to send aid, rumors of nobles conspiring with the enemy, and the ever-present dread that the city's walls might soon crumble. But Zoe refused to yield to despair. Summoning the last threads of Byzantine diplomacy, she orchestrated secret negotiations with foreign powers. Envoys slipped through hidden gates bearing pleas and promises. From the courts of Venice, Genoa, and even the distant kingdoms of Western Europe, she sought allies willing to intervene before the final assault. But the world beyond Constantinople had grown weary of Byzantium's centuries-old struggles. The Ottoman Empire was rising with unstoppable force, and Europe's attention was torn by its own wars and ambitions. Zoe's letters, sealed with the imperial eagle and written in a delicate hand, often met cold indifference or cautious delay. Behind the scenes, a darker storm brewed. Within the palace walls, power struggles festered like an infected wound. Some noble factions, seeing the inevitable collapse, whispered of surrender, plotting to save themselves through secret deals with Sultan Mehmed. Others eyed Zoe's influence with suspicion. A young empress wielding power in a man's world was an affront to tradition and ambition alike. A trusted advisor, a silver-haired courtier named Demetrios, warned Zoe in hushed tones of growing unrest. "Your Majesty, there are those who would see the city fall not by cannon, but by dagger and poison. Be vigilant." Zoe nodded, her jaw clenched. She knew too well that in this court, loyalty was a currency often bought and sold in shadows. Friends became foes overnight, and every smile could hide a blade. Yet, even as enemies multiplied within and without, Zoe's courage burned brighter than the fires consuming the city's outskirts. She visited the wounded soldiers, her hands steady as she offered words of solace. She walked among the terrified citizens, assuring mothers and children that the empire's spirit would not die. In secret, Zoe devised a daring plan, a marriage alliance to bind Venice's naval power to Constantinople's desperate defense. If Venice could be persuaded to send its fleet to break the Ottoman blockade, the city might hold a little longer. Risking everything, Zoe sent a trusted envoy to Venice, bearing lavish gifts and heartfelt pleas. The Doge, a shrewd man with the weight of centuries on his shoulders, listened with wary eyes. The promise of Byzantine gold was tempting, but the cost, men and ships, was steep. In those tense days, the palace was a stage for whispered negotiations, silent betrayals, and dangerous liaisons. Zoe found herself navigating this perilous dance with all the grace and cunning of a seasoned player, masking fear beneath a mask of regal composure. But fate, cruel and indifferent, had other designs. News arrived that a faction within the city had opened secret talks with the Ottomans, promising to betray a lesser gate for safe passage and power after the fall. Panic rippled through the defenders, trust shattered like broken glass. Zoe's heart pounded as she confronted the traitors, her voice a quiet blade cutting through their lies. You gamble not only with your lives, but with the souls of every man, woman, and child within these walls. Remember, history will not forget. Days blurred into nights filled with the din of battle. The Ottoman army launched wave after wave of assault, battering gates and scaling walls under cover of smoke and fire. The defenders fought with desperate valor, their swords drenched in sweat and blood. Amid the chaos, Zoe took refuge in the Hagia Sophia, a sanctuary where prayers mingled with the distant roar of war. Kneeling beneath its soaring domes, she offered up her own silent plea, not for glory, but for mercy, for the city she loved, for an empire slipping through her fingers. Her resolve hardened. If the empire was to fall, it would not be for want of courage or hope. But even as she prepared for the city's last stand, whispers reached her of a final, terrible betrayal, a conspiracy within the palace itself to surrender the city in exchange for power and survival. Zoe's world narrowed to a single truth. To save Byzantium, she would have to confront not only the enemy outside, but the darkness within. The night air was thick with smoke and sorrow, as the last embers of hope flickered beneath the shattered walls. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the Ottoman banners fluttered like a gathering storm, and the lost Empress stood, unbowed, ready to fight for an empire's soul until the very end. The dawn rose blood-red over Constantinople, casting a sinister glow on shattered walls and smoke-choked streets. The city was a crucible of fire and steel, its people bound by terror and fierce defiance as the Ottoman army prepared for the final assault. The air hung heavy with the scent of burnt wood, salt from the sea, and the bitter taste of desperation. Inside the great palace, Empress Zoe moved swiftly through corridors once echoing with imperial grandeur, now filled with cries of anguish and the rustle of hastily gathered belongings. Her cloak billowed behind her like a dark banner, the golden eagle stitched upon it, a fading emblem of a fading realm. The last council had ended hours before, their voices hoarse, their faces etched with exhaustion and grim resolve. The decision was made. The city would fight to the bitter end. Zoe's eyes, sharp and resolute, met those of the generals and nobles gathered in the chamber. "We stand on the edge of history," she declared, voice steady though her heart thundered within. "Let it be said we did not falter, that in the face of overwhelming darkness we chose to burn bright." Outside, the Ottoman forces massed like a living tide, their banners rippling in the cold morning wind. Sultan Mehmed II, a young man whose ambition knew no bounds, watched from a hilltop, eyes fixed on the prize that had eluded conquerors for centuries. The first wave surged forward, battering ram crashing against the city's gates, siege towers looming like monstrous beasts. Arrows darkened the sky, and the clash of steel rang through the narrow streets as defenders met the invaders in desperate combat. Amid the chaos, Zoe remained a pillar of strength. She moved among the wounded, her hands steady as she bandaged cuts and whispered prayers. Her presence was a balm, a spark of hope in the darkness. But even as the city fought, betrayal struck at its heart. A secret gate, once thought secure, was opened from within, flooding Ottoman troops into the city's veins. Panic rippled through the defenders, turning organized resistance into frantic struggle. Zoe's voice rose above the din, rallying those who would hear. "For the Empire! For our ancestors! We hold or we fall together!" The fighting grew savage, hand to hand in the crumbling streets. Flames devoured wooden homes. Smoke curled like specters above ruined towers. The sacred Hagia Sophia, a symbol of Byzantine faith and endurance, echoed with the clash of battle and the cries of the dying. In the palace's darkest hour, Zoe faced a choice: flee and save her life, or stay and stand with the people she had sworn to protect. Her resolve was iron. Gathering her most trusted allies, she prepared a desperate escape by sea, hoping to carry the last vestiges of the empire's legacy beyond the waves. The night was thick with fear and hope, the moon a pale witness to a city's final heartbeat. But fate was cruel. The escape was betrayed. Ottoman forces intercepted the flotilla, capturing Zoe and those who dared flee. Bound and shrouded in sorrow, she was brought before Sultan Mehmed. The young sultan regarded her not as a prisoner but as a trophy. the symbol of a fallen empire now in his grasp. Yet, even in captivity, Zoe's spirit refused to break. "An empire may fall," she said quietly, meeting Mehmed's gaze, "but its soul endures in the hearts of those who remember." Her words echoed in the grand halls of the Ottoman palace, a haunting reminder that while walls and crowns may crumble, the legacy of Byzantium would never be forgotten. Zoe's fate beyond that day remains shrouded in mystery. Some say she lived out her days in exile, others whisper of secret missions to preserve Byzantine culture. What is certain is that her courage, her fierce defiance in the face of doom, marked her as the last true guardian of an empire lost to time. The sun had long vanished behind the distant hills, but the memory of Constantinople's fall burned bright, a fire that refused to be extinguished by time or conquest. The mighty empire that had ruled the world for over a millennium was no more, yet its spirit lived on in whispers, stories, and the hearts of those who remembered. Empress Zoe Palaiologina's fate became a legend wrapped in mystery and sorrow. Some said she was taken to the Ottoman court, where she lived out her days cloaked in silence, a living reminder of a vanished era. Others believed she escaped into exile, carrying with her precious relics and scrolls, safeguarding the fragile heritage of Byzantium for future generations. Whatever the truth, Zoe's legacy was far greater than her own survival. She became the symbol of resilience, a woman who stood against overwhelming odds, who carried the weight of an empire on her young shoulders, and who fought not for power, but for the soul of her people. Beyond her, the world changed. The Ottoman Empire surged forward, reshaping the map of Europe and Asia. Yet, the echoes of Byzantium's grandeur influenced art, culture, and faith for centuries to come. Byzantine scholars fled westward, carrying manuscripts that helped spark the Renaissance. Orthodox Christianity endured, a living thread tying past to present. For centuries, poets and historians told the tale of the lost Empress, a figure of tragic nobility and undying hope. In the cloisters of monasteries, in the gilded halls of Venice, and in the whispered prayers of Eastern churches, her name became a symbol of courage in the face of despair. Zoe's story reminds us that even when kingdoms fall and empires crumble, the human spirit can shine through the darkest nights. Her life was a testament to the power of sacrifice, loyalty, and unyielding hope, a beacon for all who find themselves standing at the edge of history, facing the abyss. The stones of Constantinople may lie shattered, its walls overgrown with vines and memory, but the legacy of its last empress remains. A timeless reminder that empires are not merely built of stone and gold, but of the hearts and souls of those who dare to dream.